Hi, and welcome to another episode of She Leads Biotech, the podcast where we celebrate the achievements of women in the life sciences. Today's guest has spent more than 2 decades at the forefront of rare disease drug development, helping shape therapies that have quite literally changed and saved lives. With a background in pediatric endocrinology and clinical research, her career has taken her from medicine into biotech leadership, where she's become deeply passionate about one of the biggest challenges in healthcare today. How do we develop treatments for patients whose diseases are so rare that traditional models often overlook them? In this conversation, we talk about the future of rare disease innovation, mutation-defined therapies, basket trials, the realities of bringing hope to families waiting for treatments, and why patient advocacy has to remain at the center of everything biotech does. We also explore leadership in biotech, the pressures of public versus private companies, authenticity as a female executive, and what it really takes to lead in an industry built around uncertainty. And what stayed with me most is her belief that even when a cure isn't there yet, bringing hope still matters. So please welcome the Chief Medical Officer of Alltrna, Dr. Nerissa Kreher. Nerissa, hello. Happy Friday to you.
Hello, Sharon. Happy Friday to you as well.
It's lovely to talk to you. And thank you so much for joining us on the show. Where am I speaking to you from? Where are you based?
Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Oh, okay, so not too far. We're both on the East Coast. Excellent. Okay. Well, lots to dig into to find out all about you. I talk to people every day who knew from an early age, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a lawyer. Me personally, I want to be an actress. And then life gets in the way and things don't quite pan out. How was it for you? Did you know from the start? Because we know you became a doctor, but was that something you always knew you wanted to do, or was there a more non-linear path towards getting there?
I was always interested in science and math, the sort of STEM area. I'm not sure initially physician was my path. I actually explored being a veterinarian
Okay.
before the physician path. And then I think related to where I ended up in my undergraduate training, I did end up on the path to physician and incredibly happy that that happened.
So talk me through your career, because you are a pediatric I can't say it. You'll have to tell me. Educate me.
Sure, sure. So I'm a pediatric endocrinologist. Our focus is on growth disorders, puberty, all of the glands, if you will, thyroid
Okay.
diseases, adrenal diseases. So my path, I did decide to become a physician. And I actually thought that I wanted to focus on adult medicine, so internal medicine, and then did my pediatrics rotation during third year of medical school and fell in love with children
Oh,
and decided that pediatrics was the right path for me. So did my pediatrics residency. I was a chief resident for an extra year at Riley Hospital for Children in Indianapolis, and then stayed on there to do my pediatric endocrine fellowship. During that time, I had a great opportunity to participate in an NIH program that allowed me to do my master's in clinical research during my fellowship.
wow.
So I really knew that I wanted to focus on clinical research. I thought that was going to be through an academic pathway. I really had not entertained biotech or pharma at the time. But after moving out to the Boston area about a year after my fellowship training, the academic route did not work out as planned. And I ended up at a biotech company. And that was the beginning of my biotech career more than 20 years ago now.
Okay. And you've spent much of your career focused on rare disease. What keeps you committed to that space?
Yes. So my entire career has been rare disease. I started in growth hormone deficiency and supporting a product there. Growth hormone deficiency is a rare disease. But I think the early turning point was my second company was Genzyme. So, a company that many, many people know,
Yeah.
and really one of the rare disease companies that really started the push towards rare disease drug development. Henry Tamir, of course, a huge visionary in that field. So, I transitioned to Genzyme a couple of years after I started in biotech. And that's where I really fell in love and developed this passion for rare disease drug development. Just everything at Genzyme was patient focused and thinking about that. So I think Genzyme was a major turning point in my career.
I think the patient aspect, the patient communities within rare diseases is so vital. But what do people outside of rare disease biotech sometimes misunderstand about those patient communities?
Yes, probably a number of things. I think there, of course, is the thinking around, are there enough patients? If you think about rare disease, are there enough patients? Can you find those patients? They might exist, but maybe because there hasn't been a therapy available for them, they're not in the healthcare system. They're not well known to potential principal investigators and such. So I do think that there are people, whether it's investors, whether it's commercial colleagues that think sometimes rare disease development is not feasible.
Yep.
But I think with the right amount of work and detail and focus, clearly there are plenty of companies and drugs that have been successful in the space.
Do you have to have a certain number of patients in a clinical trial um, to make it viable before they say, oh, yes, even if it's a rare disease and there may not be too many of them, is there still a sort of point where if you don't have that number of people in the trial, we wouldn't consider it valid?
I think that's a great question. And a few years ago, the answer would have been more of a specific, yes, that's true.
Right.
So, in that context, you think about things like statistical power. And certainly, you do have to have a certain number of patients to have enough power in a study. Now, I do think that this is changing. And what we're seeing over the last few years is more focus on things like N of one drug development, where a therapy is developed for literally one single patient. And we're seeing guidances from FDA come out on N of one drug development. Now, there's a gap between N of one and then a larger rare disease patient population. I think we're also filling that gap through other innovations, whether that be statistical methodology like Bayesian or adaptive clinical trial designs, whether that be things like platform trials, which would include basket trials, where something we're working on at Alltrna actually is instead of studying one disease at a time, basketing patients with various diseases into a single clinical trial, where then you've got more of the patient numbers that you're looking for. Now, I guess I've addressed this really from a clinical development perspective. There's also the question of commercial feasibility.
Yep.
And certainly there are some aspects there that do have to be considered. But again, I think we are seeing much more innovation around the more and more rare of rare diseases.
That is such a tough one, isn't it? Because, if you're the parent of a child that has a very rare disease, you just want the cure found and something happening. To actually have to consider the commercial viability of it, or how much is it then going to cost to do that, must be a real heart-wrenching thing for both professionals, parents obviously, but professionals and doctors, everybody involved in it, to, yay, great, we've brought it to the end. We can't afford to, nobody can afford to have it. It's a real tough one, isn't it?
I think that's true. I reflect on a number of sitting in patient advocacy group meetings, and talking to families who are saying, it's great that this is being developed for X rare disease. When is something going to be developed for my child's rare disease. And I do think that's where being able to think about, are there ways that we can develop drugs that have the same, obviously the same mechanism, but a mechanism that might be shared across a number of different diseases. One example, I was just at a rare disease meeting yesterday with patient advocates, and one of them was bringing up a mechanism that is similar in their rare disease as to an oncology mechanism. And so, again, I do think we just have to think more broadly
Yep.
about shared mechanisms and if there are drugs that can work across a number of those diseases.
And you touched on it, and I want to spend more time now talking about Alltrna because their approach, your whole approach is approaching rare diseases differently. And you talked about mutation-defined therapies. Can you explain the idea behind that?
Certainly. So Alltrna is developing tRNA or transfer RNA therapies. So transfer RNAs are important in creating proteins. So with the mRNA or the genetic code, there are mutations called nonsense mutations, which lead to stop codons. Stop codons ultimately lead to a protein not being formed or not being formed correctly, such that it's not productive. And so these nonsense mutations are shared across many different genetic diseases. So our tRNA therapies, instead of being specific to a certain disease or a certain gene, they actually work across these different nonsense mutations. And so what we're looking at doing is, just as I was describing earlier, instead of studying our tRNA in one single disease, thinking about, are there groups of patients with similar enough disease that we can study them all together in a basket trial? So our first iteration of that is a drug we call AP003, and that is delivered in a lipid nanoparticle. And so with that, it goes to the liver. So our first focus is on a group of diseases called inborn errors of metabolism, things like phenylketonuria, organic acidemias, urea cycle disorders. So ultimately, our vision that we would have this one single drug, AP003, being studied in probably around 10 or so of these inborn errors, all in one single clinical trial, ultimately leading to an approval or indication that we would call stop codon disease.
I feel so schooled. Honestly, I love doing things like this and then just taking on board everything. I think it's incredible. What do you see as the challenges that you're likely to face in all of this? Because it all sounds, this is fantastic. Let's get moving. Okay, what are we going to
Yes.
do? But what are the challenges that get in the way of that?
Today's episode is brought to you by CNA USA Executive Search. We support life sciences, biotech, medtech, and advanced therapies companies with search solutions built on credibility, deep networks, and an authentic approach to partnership. If you're hiring, planning ahead, or simply want to learn more about what we do, visit cnasearchusa.com. Now, on to today's conversation.
Absolutely. So I think one of the first things is regulatory. So this is relatively new. It's not completely new. This has been done in the oncology space a number of times, less so in the rare space. And so I think one of the things is bringing regulators like at the FDA, at the EMA, along with us. And I think that's absolutely possible. There's a lot of talk if you tune in to some of the FDA programming, webinars, et cetera. We're seeing discussions around that in the rare disease space. But, making sure that we are able to design trials where there is enough power and the FDA will look at it from a review perspective in a positive light. You're looking also for diseases where the endpoints are either the same or similar enough that it makes sense to put them all into one trial,
Yep.
So I think getting that agreement with regulators around the efficacy endpoints that will be used, things like that, I think are bigger challenges. One other thing that's very important here with many of the precision medicines like ours, we do need to have genetic testing data available to identify the appropriate people for our clinical trials. So lots of people are getting genetic testing these days. But we do need to see more and more of that happening, and not only just getting the testing, but it being in databases where the principal investigators can find the data and utilize the data appropriately. So it's not just the testing, but also just access to the data.
And is that like the whatever ones there are, 23andMe, or is it that's what you're talking about? Is a starting point
So
for collecting that stuff?
that would be a starting point. There are other databases that are maybe a little more comprehensive, but that type of database is the idea.
Okay.
Yes.
And I guess you kind of have all of the privacy laws and all of those protections as to people giving permission for that data to be accessed for other than finding your long lost cousin from, or whether you're related to the Queen or something like that. But genetics, there's a lot more to it, right?
There is. You're absolutely right, Sharon. So, in this situation, the way a sponsor works with a principal investigator, we often, never see a patient's name.
Yep.
We might not even see their full date of birth for that privacy protection. But really, it's making sure that the centers where you would be running the trials have access to the data, can search it, and find potential patients so that they can make recruitment outreach to them.
It's incredible how quickly it's all moving forward, isn't it?
Yes,
And
it is.
I think it's watch this space to see how fast it progresses. Now, you're the Chief Medical Officer at Alltrna, and I know that's how I first came across you, because I know you were involved in a sort of 360 CMO summit, and your part of it was the difference between private and public CMO roles. And from a recruiter perspective, I'm really intrigued to hear your take on that. Can you share some of that with us?
Certainly. And kudos to the CMO Summit. It's such a great meeting. I enjoy it every single year. So I've had an opportunity. I've been a CMO since 2017, and I've actually had an opportunity to be a CMO at two companies where I joined and we were private and we took the company public. So
Right.
great opportunity to do that and to make this compare and contrast. I think in a private company, of course, the private to public, I think the biggest difference is the disclosures that you're responsible for. So, of course, at a public company, we have all types of disclosure responsibilities to our investors. And so there are, you just have to be always on top of your game regarding what has been disclosed publicly, what has not been disclosed, and certain timelines with which certain information that would be considered necessary to disclose, those timelines can be very short. And so you're often up against the wire to try to understand the data that has to be disclosed and put the story and the messaging around the data that has to be disclosed in a short period of time. So I think that's one of the biggest differences, is just the sort of eyes that are on a public company as opposed to a private company. Yeah, so that would be one of the big highlights.
Just before we look at any others, I just want to touch on that. Would that then mean that somebody who was a CMO in a private company, who, let's say, left and said, I think I want to go to a public company now, would be more effective more quickly than somebody coming from where they've only worked as a CMO in a public company, that they might not be fully aware, or more mistakes could be made if they go to a private company where they haven't needed to be that focused on what is shared and what isn't? Does that make a difference?
I think maybe I would say it's the opposite. So I think the disclosure requirements in a public company are more so than in the private company.
Right.
So I think the learning that's required for any C-suite executive, and actually I think really all the employees,
Yeah.
is when you go from private to public, you actually have to recognize that there are more rules and regulations that you have to follow and be on top of.
But what would you say makes a truly effective biotech executive? Not necessarily a CMO, but anywhere, anybody who is within the leadership team of a biotech.
Yes, great question. I think one thing is being able to deal with uncertainty. So biotech is incredibly fast moving. You can go from one day of not having data to the next day of having data, and things can completely change 180 degrees.
Yeah. Either good or bad, right?
Either good or bad, that's right. And so the ability to flex, to sort of roll with the punches that are handed to you and know from day to day that the uncertainty of you're not always going to know the answer, the uncertainty of you're not sure what tomorrow necessarily holds. And just being able to manage that from a mindset perspective, if that is incredibly stressful to you, that stress is going to be unhealthy for you. That
Mm.
stress is going to perhaps show in your leadership and your demeanor and how you show up every day.
Yeah.
So I do think there is a personality piece of being able to manage that uncertainty and live with it, which is perhaps different than other industries and maybe a bit even big pharma, although I think they have their same issues with uncertainty as we do in biotech.
Yeah. I mean, I think the only difference there is big pharma, because it's so regulated. People tend to be within what their box is,
Yes.
so the stress level goes to there. Whereas you're leading a small biotech, it's everything, right across the board. And which hat shall I put on today, and what am I going to do? So,
Yes.
yeah, that makes complete sense to me. Something else I've seen from your post when I was looking at various things that you've said: leadership isn't shaped just by expertise, but by purpose, perspective, and accountability to patients. You've been very involved in conversations around mentorship, leadership. Why does that matter so much to you?
Yeah. The patient piece is really at the heart of everything I do and why I come to work every day. Part of that may be because I'm a physician by training, but many of my colleagues who aren't, that is also their driver in our industry. But I truly think that we are here trying to solve problems for people living with diseases, and they have to be at the heart of what we're doing. If not, we're not going to be successful. I mentioned being at a patient advocacy group meeting yesterday, and I was saying to someone, we have to work together.
Mm.
We can't be successful in biotech without the patient advocacy groups, and they need us as well. That coming to work every day with the patient, what's the right thing to do with any decision? You have to ask yourself the question, what's the right thing to do for the patient? What would I want to do if this was my child with a disease or my brother or sister with a disease?
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So what advice do you give women stepping into executive leadership in biotech?
Yes. Being true to yourself is a really important part of stepping into your role as a leader. And I have heard other women executives say this, but I think if I reflect back on my career, early on, I might have tried to morph into what it was supposed to look like, what I was supposed to be doing or showing up as. And as I've gotten more and more comfortable in my role as an executive, I've gotten more comfortable with the fact that I need to show up as Nerissa, and how I show up will resonate with lots of people and it won't resonate with everyone. But if I'm always trying to shapeshift and be something that I'm not, I'm going to spend too much energy on that and not the right amount of energy on back to the patient, focusing on the things that really matter.
No, I totally agree with that. And I think, going back years, particularly for women, is that in order to be successful, they almost had to become man-like to do that. Right. And I know over the last, I don't know, maybe 3 years that I've really been hearing it more and more is this authentic self, bringing authenticity to everything, which can only bring success. As you say, if you are your true person, yeah, okay, there's going to be people that don't like that, but those that do will at least know that you're being true to yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think just for mental health perspectives also, we do have to take care of ourselves, because if we don't, we're not going to be here as long
Yeah.
to make an impact. And so thinking about what is healthy and what is good for physical health, for mental health, I do think we have to remind ourselves of that and remind our employees of that and be an example of that for our
Yeah.
employees.
I know that you've also been on a number of boards. You've served on boards as well as being an operator. How does serving on a board change the way you think as an operator, or doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Absolutely. So I've had the opportunity of being on the Resolute Board of Directors for almost 5 years now. And I think it's another experience where you have an opportunity to learn new things. And anytime you're learning new things, you can bring them back to your role as an operator. Resolute is a rare disease company as well, different therapeutic area, but there are so many learnings from that experience, whether it's been leadership, whether it's been mentorship, or learning like regulatory learning that has reflected on how I think about what we should be doing at the company I'm the CMO of.
And what do great biotech boards do well, in your opinion?
Yeah. So I think great biotech boards, one, look at all the options. So trying to get out of tunnel vision, trying to listen to one another, hear all of the ideas on the table, make sure that you're really exploring all of the strategic options before making a decision is really important. We all come with our background and experience, and oftentimes know what the right thing to do is, but you have to make sure that you're taking a step back, pausing, and listening to other people in the room to hear ideas that you may not have experience with or have thought of. So I do think that's a really important piece. Now, at the same time, you can't scenario plan 20 or 30 scenarios. You have to contain that
Yeah.
strategic thinking. But I really think that boards that are balanced, boards that bring a vast amount of experience from different, whether it's therapeutic areas or functional areas, are very successful if they're able to take that into consideration.
So, looking ahead, the future of rare disease innovation, what excites you most about where rare disease research is heading?
A lot of things. There might not be one most, but so I think the innovation in what we're able to develop. I mean, if we look at things like prime editing, that is moving fast and furious, and it's not an answer for everything right now. But if we think back, we were just doing gene therapy. And
Mm.
now we're to prime editing, and it's moving very quickly. And so, just the innovation that is being developed and ways to treat people is incredibly exciting. I think the other piece is delivery. So, thinking about things like AAV, again, pointing back to gene therapy,
Yep.
but there are other gene therapies being developed that are going to build upon that. Just what we're doing to build new therapies for patients is incredibly exciting. I do think the regulatory innovation is exciting as well. Things like platform designation, plausible mechanism, and those types of things that hopefully will shave some time off of our development timelines and bring therapies to patients in a safe manner, of course, but more efficiently from a time and money perspective.
Well, I'm so excited about where the direction is going for gene therapy within rare diseases, the whole basket, and this whole area of the mutations to be able to treat different rare diseases is I think, particularly exciting. I just want to ask you, what do you hope that your work ultimately changes for patients and families?
The first answer is being able to, and I've had an opportunity to participate and bring a therapy all the way through. It's a drug for hypophosphatasia that literally saved lives. Babies were born with the disease and unfortunately had no option and would oftentimes die from the disease. Now they live based on this therapy that's been developed. So,
Incredible.
that is incredible. And being able to participate in something like that in the situation where, we don't always succeed. I think still being able to bring hope that there will be therapies developed for a family, for a certain disease, that hope I think is incredibly important. It keeps people motivated, it keeps people energized. So, in the case that it's not actually bringing a cure, bringing hope for a cure is the next best step.
Where there's life, there's hope.
So
Yes.
true.
Well, again, thank you for joining
Ah,
us today. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I wish you every success. I'll be following your work very closely and look forward to maybe we could do a follow-up next year or something and see where everything is. But for now, Nerissa, thank you for joining us. Have a fabulous weekend and let's stay in touch.
thank you so much, Sharon.
Well, that's it for today. Thanks for joining me for this episode of She Leads Biotech. If today's story inspired you, subscribe, follow, and comment, because when one woman's voice is heard, many more find theirs. Until next time, stay curious, stay courageous, and keep leading.